Thank my colleague, and I yield back my time.
I thank my colleague from New York for joining us this evening. I appreciate her insight. I just want to say a couple more things about this tax that she mentioned on medical device manufacturers. You know, in my district as well, we have a couple of companies that make the drills for orthopedic surgeons where they put in the screws and that sort of thing. And this tax is, I think it's 2.3% tax, not on their profits, but on their gross. So even a small startup company that's, trying to innovate, which we have in my district, and create a new device that will help people with care, even if they're losing money, they have to pay the tax on any gross receipts they have. I mean, that's, to me, like the most regressive part of that tax. And besides that, it's forcing our medical innovators to move their companies overseas. I mean, people aren't stupid. They realize that if they're going to be taxed here in this country, even when they're losing money, they're going to move that manufacturing capability to Europe, and that's already been happening. So this law is taking the medical innovators in this country, and everyone knows, this country has been leading the way in the world in medical innovation for the last 100 years. And it's forcing those people to go overseas to do business. That's not good for America. That's taking highly skilled people and asking them to go somewhere else to do business because we have a bad climate for that. I want to talk just a little bit longer this evening about some real health care reform. And as I mentioned, the President's health care bill doesn't fix the problem with health care. The problem with health care is it's too expensive. And he doesn't, this bill doesn't make it less expensive, it's becoming more expensive. And when Medicare runs out of money, the way they're going to fix it is by decreasing payment to the hospitals and doctors that are providing you with care, so they're not going to want to take care of you either. So let me just talk a little bit about a couple of, common sense ideas that we're talking about on this side of the aisle. And the first of those has health care insurance. I mean, the problem with insurance is it costs too much. So what can we do to make it cost less? Well, I like to compare the difference between health insurance and car insurance. In car insurance, you can choose from 1,000 different companies in this country, from Florida to California to Wisconsin to Michigan, and pick a company that suits your needs. And if you don't like that company, you switch to another company. Right now, employers control the most of the health insurance. We need to have a plan that, number one, gives the individual control over the health insurance, so that you can pick a health insurance policy that you like, even if your employee next to you chooses a different policy. Why shouldn't it be? Why should it have to be the same? Why should you have to carry insurance for acupuncture if you never use acupuncture? Some states actually mandate the coverage of acupuncture. This is why insurance costs so much. Your car insurance does not pay for an oil change. It does not pay for new tires. It does not pay for routine small expenses that you can expect, because that's not what insurance is for. Insurance is for a catastrophic event. If you want your car insurance to pay for oil changes and new tires, it's going to cost a lot of money, because that's not the purpose of insurance. The purpose of insurance is to protect you from a catastrophic event. That's why the health savings account is an important component of free market health care reform, because then you will have, for example, say you're working for somebody, instead of paying your health insurance, your employer pays into a health savings account, which is then your money to use for health care. And it comes to you tax-free, so that you're not paying any taxes on it. So it would be the same as if your employer was paying for a health insurance policy for you. So that money then, you could be paying for your routine health care out of that, but then you would No, that's the money in your account now. So you may want to choose how you spend that a little carefully, because that money is in your health savings account. That's money that belongs to you now, and you can use that any way you want for your health care. Or maybe if you don't even use it all, that will be there for you in your estate once you die for your children. So you want to be careful with that. So when you're going to go get an MRI for your shoulder, you may not just go to the place that your doctor may recommend. You may shop around for an MRI, because I know, for example, that at some place you can get an MRI for $2,500, and another place you can get an MRI for $600, the same MRI. And unless you actually kind of look around for it, you're not going to be able to find that deal. You're not going to even know about it, because right now you don't even care about it, perhaps, if your insurance pays it and you have a co-pay that doesn't affect you. But if you've taken this money out of a health savings account, you're going to kind of be shopping more. That's the power of transparency and cost. So looking around to see where you can save money, to keep money in your health savings account, and then shopping for insurance that suits your needs, not the needs of the person next to you, but suits your needs, so that you may choose an insurance company, like for your car insurance, that differs from your neighbors, but suits you just fine. You may have a Chevrolet insurance, or you may have Cadillac insurance, but it's your choice. Those are just two things that I think would really diminish the cost of medicine and not involve taking over everything by the government, and actually decrease costs. The other thing that nobody really talks about much in the cost of medicine is the cost of malpractice. And malpractice is something that doctors can be very uncomfortable with, but sometimes injuries do occur. Is it a good result for a patient who's been injured to have to go to court for 5 or 6 years and then have to pay attorneys and fees for attorneys of 50 to 60% of the judgment after 5 or 6 years in court? Is that justice for an injured patient? Frankly, it's not something that doctors want to see. Doctors want to see, if there's actually an injury, let's have it dealt with in a reasonable fashion. Let's have it adjudicated in a administrative law situation where, there's been an injury. A panel of people can decide, yes, there has been an actual injury. Let's make a judgment, and let's give that patient a judgment, and let's get it done within several months. That would be better. It would eliminate the entire cost of the trial, the attorney fees, and all that. And physicians would like it. Patients would like it, I think, because it would give them speedier access to justice. And I think that by doing that, we would eliminate a lot of the extra costs that come into medicine. I mean, right now, you come into the emergency room for a a pain in your belly, you're going to get a CAT scan pretty much automatically, because the doctor's afraid of being sued, and he doesn't cost him anything. He knows it doesn't cost the patient anything. He's going to order a CAT scan. He's going to order the extra X-ray. He's going to order a lot of tests that just to protect himself. These are some of the hidden costs of malpractice that people don't really think about. They just think of the cost of malpractice as simply the cost of the doctor's insurance, which can be expensive. And it's right now different states will have different ability to attract physicians because they have different means of dealing with malpractice. But I think that for the patient, really, we need to have a better system where they get compensated faster and with less aggravation than the system we have now. So I think the main thing that we're talking about on this side, when we talk about health care reform, is to talk about, let's have a conversation with the American people. I mean, maybe you don't agree with some of these ideas of how to make our health care system better and more efficient. Well, I understand that. Let's have a conversation. Let's decide how we can do it better. Let's try a pilot program in one state Let's allow states to experiment in how to do things. Let's not, write a bill of 2,700 pages in the middle of the night that nobody read and then, put it on the American people and say it's going to be great, but we don't know what's in it because we haven't read it, and then go through the next 2.5 years realizing that it's a mistake. There's definitely needs to be room for improvement in our system, but can we have this conversation in an open fashion? I think a lot of people, even on the other side, would realize that, hey, we made a mistake. But isn't it more important to admit that we made a mistake and try to move forward in a fashion that actually cuts costs? We see it's not cutting costs. It's been devastating to the American economy. I talked to small business owners across my district over the past 2 years, and they say, the same things again and again. There's regulations that cost us money, and our health care costs are cost us money. It's going to make us not be able to hire more people. So I think we've made some real mistakes here in the past, but now is the time to address them and move forward and try to make some common sense decisions. And frankly, I'm happy to hear from people with ideas. I hear ideas from people all the time in the district that it really makes some sense, and it's certainly worth trying out. So with that, I want to thank the members of the Physicians Caucus that were here this evening for our evening hour, and I would yield back the remainder of my time.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5th, 2011, the Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gohmert, for 30 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And at this time, I want to yield to my good friends from Texas. Student of Texas A&M University as myself, a guy who, as a junior in college, when I was a senior in college, helped tutor me to make 98 on the final exam of our accounting course. But I would yield such time as he may consume to my friend Mr. Flores from Texas.
I'd like to thank my friend Mr. Gohmert from Texas for allowing me a few minutes of his time. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize an American hero, Brian Bachman, who served as Precinct 1 Constable of Brazos County, Texas, who was killed in the line of duty on August 13, 2012. Also, with yesterday's being the 11th anniversary of 9/11, I also want to recognize first responders all across our country. As I begin to write my reflections for this conversation, which I originally delivered on August 18th, words that kept coming to mind to talk about were the words home and celebration. Before proceeding, I want to remind us of the heroes of Texas District 17. Since I was sworn into office on January 5th, 2011, the 17th Congressional District of Texas has lost 7 military personnel: Sergeant Scott Burgess, Staff Sergeant Brian Burgess, Sergeant Edward F. Dixon III, PFC Jesse Dietrich, Lieutenant Colonel David Cabrera, Captain Nathan Anderson, and Lieutenant Colonel Roy Tisdale. In addition, we have lost 2 law enforcement personnel during that time: Deputy Sheriff Cliff Taylor from Johnson County, and on August 13th, we lost Constable Brian Bachman. In each case, God called home one of his children, and heaven has been celebrating since each of those arrivals. Brian and I met in early 2010 when we were both running for our respective offices. Neither of us had ever run for public office before, and even though we came from different backgrounds, we formed a great friendship that endured the rigors of tough political campaigns. Following our victories, we remained great friends. Each time we were together at various events, we always picked up our conversations where we had left off at the prior events. Most of the time, we teased each other in these conversations. The last time I talked to Brian was the Thursday before he was called home by God. We were both volunteers at the Brazos Valley Food Bank's Feast of Caring. We started out by teasing each other again. He began saying that I must not be very good a very good politician because I was already having to run again for office, to which I replied, "Oh, really, Bachman? From what I've seen, you're the reason we need term limits." Following that conversation and fellowship, we went back to cleaning tables and serving food. I never appreciated the fact that I wouldn't see him on this earth again. This is the Brian Bachman that I knew, the friendly and always smiling guy who could care less about anyone's title. He was the person that loved our community and would do anything for it. He was a model public servant. However, and more importantly, he was a servant leader who ultimately modeled the words of Jesus in John 15:13, which state, "Greater love hath no man than this, that he lay down his life for his friends." I started this conversation by talking about home and celebration. At the end of each week, I jump on a plane and head home from Washington to Texas. That is where I'm happiest. That's where my wife Gina is. It is close to our sons, our daughter-in-law, and our granddaughter. In short, it is the community that I love. I always celebrate those homecomings, and my sense of excitement always builds as the airliner approaches Bryan College Station. The same thing happened on the afternoon of August 13th as Brian's situation changed here on Earth. Others were preparing his new home. Brian knew this day would come. However, like the rest of us, he didn't know when, where, or how. But because of his relationship with Christ, he knew that he would someday be able to look forward to going to his next home for eternity. God knew all the details about Brian's homecoming, and the celebration started immediately on the afternoon when he left us. The Apostle Paul reinforces this in 2 Corinthians 5:8, where he says, "We are confident, I say, and would prefer to be away from the body and at home with the Lord." This is the same knowledge that all Christians have. We know that when our human life ends, we will move to our eternal home with God. At that moment on August 13th, Brian instantly heard the voices of those who had gone before him, welcoming him home, but more importantly, the one who loved Brian enough to die for him held out his nail-pierced hands, embraced him, and said, "Howdy, Brian. Welcome to your new home." Those same hands and arms embrace and comforts Brian's family and all of us here now. About 20 years ago, Max Lucado wrote a book titled The Applause of Heaven. I'm going to paraphrase the last few paragraphs of that book as follows. "You'll be home soon. You may not have noticed it, but you're closer to home than ever before. Each moment is a step taken. Each breath is a page turned. Each day is a mile marker passed, a mountain climbed. You're closer to home than you've ever been." Just as when my airline flight approaches Bryan College Station each week, before you know it, your appointed arrival time will come. You'll descend the ramp and enter the city. You'll see the faces that are waiting for you. You'll hear your name spoken by those who love you. And in the back, behind the anxious crowd, the one who would rather die than live without you will remove his pierced hands from his heavenly robe and applaud your arrival. We should be celebrating Brian's heavenly homecoming here on earth as well. He is another soldier that fought the good fight and got home where God has told him, "Well done, good and faithful servant." Brian's parents, Brad and Carmen, his wife Donna, and his children Sam, Amanda, Colby, and Caitlin can all take comfort in Brian's homecoming because we know that the cross of Jesus is won again. Brian's sacrifice should remind us that we're all here to serve. It is my prayer that Brian's homecoming reminds us of all our human frailties and the shortness of our time here on this earth. I'm hopeful that all of us will have the type of relationship with Christ that Brian did, so we will have similar homecomings with him in heaven. Let me close by asking everyone here to pray for and support the Bachman family. Please pray for our country during these troubled times. Please pray for our military men and women who sacrifice to protect us abroad. And please pray for our first responders like Brian Bachman who protect us here at home. Brian, we celebrate your homecoming. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Texas will be recognized.
How much time is remaining?
The gentleman has 25 minutes remaining. 25.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a difficult day, difficult week in the world. And I appreciate the tribute of my friend Bill Flores for a great American hero. I also want to pay tribute today to our U.S. Ambassador Chris Stevens and the 3 others who were killed in Libya in the service of their country. We grieve for their families. We grieve for their friends and all who may have come to harm and will come to harm, hopefully no more, but our thoughts and prayers are with them. It is important during times when Americans are attacked and American soil, American buildings are attacked, which is what an American embassy is, that the world understand that there will be consequences. For those who sometimes want to ask, well, aren't you a Christian? Don't you believe in turning the other cheek? The answer is yes, individually. But there is a different charge for the government. There is a different charge for the people who have the responsibility of government and protecting the people and their rights. The United States government has the obligation to protect our citizens, to protect those who are serving this country, and as far as our military, to give them everything they need to win whatever it takes, give them rules of engagement to allow them to win at all, whatever it takes, and then come home. So it grieves me much also to see that a time when people are dying not for a wishy-washy government in Washington, D.C., they can't decide what its priorities are, but for the ideals for which America stands and for what it represents to people who yearn for freedom around the world. And it does not help when an administration, in response to American attacks on American soil and American individuals, the administration ends up asking Americans to give up their First Amendment rights for which our service members are fighting. It doesn't help when a general calls an American and asks an American to give up your First Amendment rights rather than proclaiming to the world, we're the United States military, you've attacked our country, you've attacked our brothers and sisters, and you will pay for that. That, when we took an oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, it means that when enemies who are foreign enemies attack American soil, attack Americans because they're Americans, we have an obligation. If they were not protected and they got hurt or killed, we have an obligation to those who would serve behind them, to those who are in this country, to protect them for the future. And that doesn't come when an administration or even a general turns around and says, hey, I know I took an oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, but we think by your utilizing your First Amendment rights, it may be offending people around the world. So why don't you just subject your First Amendment rights to Sharia law? And so it's okay to burn a Bible, that's okay. Okay to burn a flag, okay, that's all right. But just, for heaven's sake, don't say anything that might offend someone of the Islamic religion. Well, I personally don't think anybody should do that. But I certainly do think we should defend ourselves against radical Islamists that want to annihilate this country and destroy our way of life. We have an obligation. We took an oath to do that. Not an oath to say, let's give up the Constitution I took an oath to defend and subject it to Sharia. No. Let's give that up so that maybe the people that are killing Americans and the people that are attacking our embassies, maybe they won't feel so offended and maybe they won't kill people. That is not the role of a general. It's not the role of a general to tell former military members that they should never speak out against a commander-in-chief when, as former members of the military, they're in a good place to be able to judge what's going on, because it is and should be a crime within the military to create problems for good order and discipline by publicly demeaning or condemning anyone in your chain of command. My 4 years at Fort Benning, we knew that. President Carter drove me crazy with his ineptitude, his inability to make decisions, to make the tough calls, his pathetic handling of the attack on our American embassy in Tehran, for which America still pays for the pathetic way it was handled. For those of us who've been in the military, there's an obligation. When you see the same mistakes being repeated, since you know that those in uniform cannot step up and criticize the chain of command, we have an obligation to do that, and it is not helpful for anyone with stars on their shoulders to tell former military members, oh, this is not appropriate for you to criticize my boss. How about the person with stars on their shoulders stepping up and doing the criticism privately on behalf of the soldiers he's supposed to be commanding and protecting? Well, there's stories that are coming out. Time will tell. This one from Fox News today, entitled "U.S. Officials Suspect Strike on Benghazi Post Coordinated, Timed for 9/11 Anniversary." U.S. officials are increasingly suspicious that the murder Tuesday of the U.S. ambassador to Libya, Christopher Stevens, and 3 other American officials was not the result of a protest against anti-Islam film, but instead was a coordinated terrorist strike timed for the 11th anniversary of the September 11 attacks. A senior administration official told Fox News that they are exhaustively investigating every angle of the attack in Benghazi and an earlier assault on the U.S. Embassy in Cairo, Egypt, but there are early signs that the Benghazi assault may have been planned. The official cautioned, though, that the administration has not jumped to any conclusions about what happened, saying it would be premature to do so. The article goes on down, and it quotes different people. One, Pete Hoekstra, former chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, who told Fox News that the attack appeared to have the markings of an al-Qaeda or al-Qaeda-affiliated strike. Quotes him as saying, "We've been talking for years about the desire of al-Qaeda, radical jihadists, to celebrate the anniversary of 9/11. All of my background, all of the conversations that I've had over the last 18 hours lead many people to believe that this was just one was just more than a mere coincidence. Heckscher noted that the supposed protesters, purportedly angry over a film that ridiculed Islam's prophet Muhammad, didn't attack in Tripoli. They attacked in Benghazi, where it so happens our ambassador is. And they happen to be fully armed and fully equipped. Heckscher noted that al-Qaeda chief Ayman al-Zawahiri had recently released a video calling on militants to attack Americans in revenge for the killing of an operative in Pakistan. The message said, "His blood is calling on you, inciting you to fight and kill the Crusaders." Heckscher said the film may have been just a cover to carry out such an attack. Two intelligence officials also said the attack looked coordinated. London-based think tank Quililium reached the same conclusion, saying the Benghazi strike appeared to be a well-planned terrorist attack that would have occurred regardless of the demonstration over the film. Also, the brother of Zawahiri was nearby during the separate protests at the American Embassy in Cairo on Tuesday. There's so much going on. But the last thing, one of the last things that people ought to do is say it's time to give up First Amendment rights. One of the goals that we know for the Muslim Brotherhood in the United States within 10 years, it was at one of their 10-year goals, was to subjugate the U.S. Constitution to Sharia law. There are great patriots who have called upon Americans to perhaps make it illegal to speak out and offend or do anything that might offend worshipers of Islam without saying the same thing about any other religion, whether it's Buddhist, Christian, whatever. If they have their way, and if we make the mistake of curtailing our constitutional rights to avoid offending people who want to annihilate us anyway and want to have an international caliphate where they rule over us anyway, those they don't destroy, we make a major error. For those who say there should be no criticism among members of Congress, people in the government, as to the handling by the Commander-in-Chief, I think we have an obligation, since we know people in uniform cannot speak out when they see mistakes by their commanders. We have an obligation to them to speak out. But I do make this pledge to my friends across the aisle that in any criticism, I will endeavor to ensure that I personally do not ever make the kind of wild-eyed allegations against this president that were leveled at President Bush by them. How quickly some people forget. Also, I understand this is a political season. It is a time when people are running for election and re-election. We all know that. But we have a friend. We have a prime minister of a friendly nation who has been mistreated by this administration, who deserves better treatment by this administration, who deserves to have this administration and this president keep their words that have been given to our friends in Israel And it wouldn't hurt to meet with such a leader. We know that in July that there were people who came to the White House for meetings in the White House, one of whom was a member of a known terrorist organization. And that terrorist was allowed into the White House. Now, obviously from the hearing we had with Secretary of Homeland Security Janet Napolitano, from a response she gave to me, she was ignorant of the fact that we had a terrorist going into the White House for meetings. But by the next day, when she testified, I believe, across in the Senate, she had become aware that we had a terrorist, a member of a terrorist organization meeting in the White House. And apparently this administration intends to continue meeting with members of known terrorist organizations from what was said back in July. And yet, the President, though time for meetings with known terrorists, will not carve out a little time to meet with the Prime Minister of our dear friend Israel at a time when Israel and many in the United States suspect that Iran may be 2 months away from having the nukes to carry out another Holocaust. We don't know the specific days there may be, but it would seem that you wouldn't necessarily need a rocket to have pinpoint accuracy if it's carrying a nuclear weapon. And now that we have seen trouble on the borders of Israel, all around Israel almost, it doesn't seem it would be impossible to get one smuggled in. The rockets have been smuggled in by the hundreds that are routinely fired into Israel from the Gaza Strip. That's why there was a legitimate legal blockade to try to prevent those type things from coming into the Gaza Strip, but they came in anyway, and they continue to come in. We owe our friend, our ally, who this president has pressured, has cajoled, has ridiculed, has snubbed, and taunted by saying, just trust us, we'll take care of Iran. Don't worry about your national security. Yeah, trust us. No nation should be told that they cannot invoke self-defense when their nation is at risk of being annihilated. Remember learning in college that President Eisenhower had ordered that people from towns surrounding areas of these concentration camps, where when totaled together 6 million Jews were killed, murdered, tortured, maimed. But he ordered that the people from the towns be required to come help clean up. And the reasoning was so that no one could ever say the Holocaust never happened, because they cleaned up the atrocity. And I remember thinking, now that was a little overboard for General Eisenhower. Really? You had to rub those people's noses in such horrible, horrible affliction. And it hadn't been that long ago I had these thoughts. And now we have people like leaders of countries like Iran that is about to have nuclear weapons if we don't intercede, who have said just that. The Holocaust never happened. It was a hoax. Unbelievable. It is unbelievable to me that in a matter of decades since World War II, since that horrible Holocaust, such an indictment against the human race that that people could do that to one race. It's just almost unfathomable that even in Europe, where those atrocities were committed, a genocide was attempted, that we would see this growing anti-Semitism raising its ugly head again. And at the same time, anti-Semitism is growing even in Europe, a civilized area, an educated area. And it grows around the world. And as we see people in the Middle East begin to have dreams of a new Ottoman Empire where every religion will be subjected to some of what we've seen happen in those countries where we helped bring about an Arab Spring that's turned into a winter nightmare. This is not a time to play petty personal games, to snub leaders of friends, of allies, even when you disagree with them, for heaven's sake. Take a little time from a fundraiser. Take a little time that you don't go to the golf course and meet with a leader of a country that sees hatred for its people, anti-Semitism, the racism, the bigotry growing around the world, who is scared for its own existence, who can't be sure that we're going to be there with them because of the actions of this administration. Take a little time to meet with them. I mean, it is an inconvenient thing to have to be president when you're really best at running for office. But take some time and be president and meet with our friends. The messages that are going out to those who we seek to make allies for the future is not a good message. The people that have laid down their lives for the American ideal deserve the best we can give them. And so, on this day, when we grieve and our flags are at half-mast for the atrocity committed against our ambassador and others, our thoughts and prayers are with the families, and our thoughts and prayers are that our leadership will become what it should be to protect America. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Does the gentleman have a motion?
This time I move, we do now hereby adjourn.
The question is on the motion to adjourn. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Accordingly, the House stands adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow for morning hour debate.
So that wraps up Worker in the House for the day.